All right, I got to record off this, so I'm actually in the video today. All right, so let's take a look at the page 99. So the first couple problems, this is on page 99 of your books. Starting this to review for Quizaroo. I don't think this quiz should be really tough. It says, research from Imperial College in London shows daily serving of nuts like cashews, walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds, as well as peanuts, can reduce the risk of death from diabetes by 40%. I guess these people aren't allergic to nuts. And cut heart disease by 30%, cancer by 15%, according to CBS News. So state the null hypothesis. State the null and the alternative. So problem number one, the null is nuts have no effect of death for diabetes, heart, or cancer. So that's the null. Our hypothesis, or HA, is nuts reduce the risk. Okay, of diabetes, blah, blah, blah. Okay? Did the study fail to reject or reject the null hypothesis? How do you know? So being that they had all these percents, they were able, this is problem number two, they reject the null because they found strong evidence. They had already found evidence. Strong evidence. Okay, evidence EV. And then is this one tail or two tail? It is a one tail. One tail. I'm supposed to say tail. One tail because reduce is one directional. If we had something of, how it was open-ended, it might say a little bit different. So will you try, see if you can figure out 4 through 7, give you about 5 minutes to play around with that, and we'll go over them briefly. So try 4 through 7 on page 99. All right, let's hit those next couple. It says, our use of long-term supplemental oxygen did not prolong life or delay time to first hospitalization compared with no long-term supplementation in patients with stable chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, with resting or exercise induced moderate desaturation according to the results of the study published in the New England Journal of Medicine. All right, so let's move this up. All right, so number 4, state the null and the alternative. So supplemental O2 does not, and you know that's a null because you have not in there, prolong life. And we could, for COPD. The alternative is HA, supplemental O2, prolongs life. Okay? Says, would this be one tail or two tail? It is a one tail. So this is number 4, number 5. This is one tail because they talked about prolonging life. So you're extending life. You're going longer in life. That's one tail. And then it says, is a p-value of 0.035 plausible for this study? Explain. Well, if I had a p-value of 0.35, this is talking about 3.5%. Okay? So, no, this p-value would have found strong evidence that oxygen prolongs life, and we did not. Okay, so if that was the p-value. Assume the p-value is, I don't know why this, because I bumped it, was 0.376. Interpret this statistical context of the question. So this says that we have a 37.6% chance that any improvement we saw from oxygen, 37%. If you got a 37% on a test or quiz, you don't like that. So this is strong evidence that any improvement that we saw was just a random chance. So our study would have been a random chance if this happened. Okay? So that's the first page. I am on to the next page, which I guess is page 100 if I can count up correctly. Okay. What? Yeah.
So for 5, so it's a one-tailed hypothesis because it only talks about prolonging.
Yes.
It'd be two-tailed if it said has an effect.
An effect, yeah. Okay. Exactly. That's exactly right. That goes back when we were saying global warming. That's one tail. Climate change. Okay. Both ends of the spectrum take place, or it could take place, or do take place, or however. Number 8 says a medical study will be performed to see if there's a link between coffee consumption and acid reflux disease. And they tell you have a p-value of 0.019. So 0.19, describe the context. We found strong evidence that coffee consumption is linked to acid reflux. Okay? So that p-value, you're kind of testing against your null. So, if there's a link between the consumption of coffee, so that's going to be a two-tailed test, and this will find strong evidence because we're going to accept the hypothesis. A study is performed to see if excessive smartphone use leads to insomnia. Okay, so the null would be does not lead to insomnia. So you have a p-value of 0.16, so we fail to find strong evidence that excessive smartphone use leads to insomnia. Meaning you all are on your smartphones or phones of some sort, you're all sleeping well because you make it to the early morning class, so good to get up. Number 10, it says, a study is performed to see if high cholesterol levels can be associated with increased risk for heart disease. P is 0.048. And again, the 0.048 is 4.8%, so that's pointing to the null. So if we can, so the null would be high cholesterol does not have a risk. Being we have 0.48 or 4.8% in that with the null, that means that we found evidence that high cholesterol levels are associated with increased levels of heart disease. So you're accepting the hypothesis. We wish to perform to see if an increased presence of superheroes increased safety level of everyone in the city. Oh, very good. So our null is superheroes do not have an effect on city safety levels, and our alternative or our null or just our hypothesis, superheroes improve city safety levels. Reword the alternative hypothesis to make it two tails. Superheroes change city safety, so it either increases or decreases, so that makes it two-tail. So when you make it two-tail, you don't want to have it directional. You want to say it can go either way. And then explain why a one-tailed test is generally more preferable than two-tailed test. So sometimes your conclusions are more specific if you use a one-tail. You might find evidence that could either increase or decrease, so we can look for evidence for a specific increase or a specific decrease of information. So, friends, with that known, that is all the review is for the 6.1 to 6.3. It is pretty easy. Things that you really need to make sure, realize that the p-score, your p-value, points to the null hypothesis. So this is where you have no or something in the terms of no. Okay. Lower the p, means score means that we have evidence for just the hypothesis. So you're testing the null always. Okay, you're not testing the hypothesis. You can't conclude that the hypothesis is true. It's just that if we have a low p-score, and what's a low p-score? Well, always think of it as a test score. If you had a p-value that you're like, dude, I like my test score. What do students like on test scores? Let's say in the 70, 60, 70, 80% range, 90% range if you can get there. But realize p-score is given to you as a decimal. Move the decimal 2 places to the right to make it 8%, and that kind of makes it a little bit more tolerable to figure it out. So that's what we got. Any other questions for me?
What's due on Friday?
What's due on Friday? Ooh, good question. Something. It would be the page 101 and 102. Page 101 and 102. So page 101 and 102 is due Friday. Thursday on this short week, we have the 6-1 to 6-3 quiz. And I would say note cards would be very good. I think you can squeeze just about everything on that sheet onto a note card. And if you need a note card, you can come get one. But that's all I have for you all today. If that's okay.